That is an absentee now.
That is an
Yeah,
absentee now?
yeah. In other words,
Really?
the absentee ballot used to be, we just changed the language.
Okay.
Okay, absentee was for those people with an excuse.
Right.
I'm out of the county or whatever it may
Right.
be. I'm a soldier. But now any registered voter can vote by mail. So we say vote by mail now instead of saying absentee.
But that, I got to tell you, that takes a lot of potential corruption out of the system for precinct captains. I remember when they used to go around with the absentee ballots. Personally, I mean, they'd pick them up. They weren't supposed to, but they'd go around and go to houses in the neighborhood and tell people, "Oh, you can vote absentee. You know, here, I'll take your ballot."
Well,
Right?
you always have to look out for that.
Yeah.
And we try and do a lot of educating. That, for example, when you do a vote by mail, only you or a family member or the postal service can deliver that.
Right.
And it's aimed just at what you're saying. In
Right.
the old days when, and let's say it was a nice precinct captain, an honest precinct captain.
Right.
He's just helping out the older person, take it down the block to the poll. But the point is, when you vote by mail, it's supposed to have the same sanctity as it would if you were voting in the polling place,
Right.
which means we have to protect it. So it might be a great precinct volunteer. On the other hand, somebody else could open up the ballot, change it, and
Yeah, but it was illegal to do it. I
absolutely.
mean, even if it was a nice guy, it was
That's right.
illegal.
It's illegal and still is. We want to warn people that if someone is marking their ballot as we speak,
Yeah.
Saturday afternoon, they can ask help from anybody, they can ask help from their family,
Right.
but they cannot have someone outside their family take their ballot to our office or to the post office.
David, that used to be a gold mine of stories for me at election time. I used to go, I'd find these people, these precinct captains had been around and they'd collected 5 or 10 people in a precinct, you know. I'd just say, oh, you can vote absentee and I'll pick it up Tuesday, you know. It used to be a gold mine. In fact, they did it, the last one I did some time ago, they did it to a bunch of Korean voters, you know.
Well, that's why we have a lot of processes, including we do a lot of calling, double checking,
Right.
asking people before when they have to have a reason. You'll call people, and sometimes then you discover things. Like, oh well, my captain told me I could do this. Well, no, you can't. So there are cases when we've had to be pretty rigid. Right now, it looks pretty good, knock on wood.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. Uh, Do you have to have a government issued photo ID card to vote?
on election day, no. Illinois,
Really?
oh no, Illinois is you prove your identity when you register. When you register,
That's what I thought.
yeah. No, it's only. See, here's the problem, and you've seen what's happened lately. There's no question we all have to be sensitive to fraud,
Right.
preventing it. But in my view, anyway, what's happened is, start with the Bush White House several years ago. They found every opportunity to try and restrict voting,
Right.
and so you saw several states pass voter ID laws,
Including Wisconsin.
including Wisconsin, and many of those have been struck down now. And they've been struck down because it's an overreach. In other words, you're always trying to balance. You want as many people to participate as possible, but you don't want people to be cheating. The difficulty is in many of these states, and it's all Republican, that have passed these voter ID laws. For example, the Justice Department just struck down the Texas law.
Right.
Okay, and they pointed out, even though Texas themselves did the study, and it pointed out that 800,000 Hispanics do not have IDs in the state of Texas. And even when they said, well, why don't we let them freely get them, or why don't we make it easier for people to get to places, they wouldn't agree to any of that. So it was easy for the Justice Department to conclude this is not about voter fraud, really. This is about suppressing.
Right.
Okay, and they Justice Department also struck down the South Carolina ballot. A Wisconsin judge struck down the Wisconsin one. So again, most all across the country, people prove their identity when they register to vote. Now, early voting is different. Like that's the exception.
Right.
Now, early voting, since it's before the election day, like you, if you went to
Yeah.
many of the facilities all throughout the state of Illinois, there you have to show ID, and that we agree with because we have to make sure that Dick Kay doesn't stop, out here in Rolling Meadows, and then he goes over to Cicero, and then he pops in down at
Right.
Orland Park.
Right.
And so now we have real-time computers. So the second that Dick Kay votes in one spot, we have a control over that.
Let me tell you, I went to vote early,
Mhm.
and the lady, God bless her, She said, I need to see your photo ID card, government issued ID card, your driver's license, you know. It's got my picture on it. I hand her my driver's license. And she said, okay, now you have to sign here and here. You know, I'm signing for my ballot. She's got my ID, my picture in her hand. And she said, that D looks a little different. I said, what do you think? The D in my signature looks different than the one in my driver's license?
She's trying to be real careful, huh?
You know?
Maybe she'd heard about your reputation, that's why she's checking.
Yeah, get out, you know? Good Lord.
Well, you know, but some of these, those can be legitimate things, but some of the schemes, for example, again, they're not all Republicans, but remember, the world has changed. Republicans, some of them used to be more moderate, some of them supported when we first got the new classic ways to register, vote, motor vote, and so forth. But now with the push of the right wing and all this, for example, as you probably know, the League of Women Voters, one of the most respected groups in the nation, has pulled out of Florida because Florida was actually swearing, if you don't turn in all these voter registration cards within 48 hours, we will fine you. Now remember, a lot of these places, you may be 40...
Wait, the League of Women Voters has pulled out of Florida?
League of Women Voters pulled out of Florida with a great protest. There's a lawsuit going on because Florida was so onerous. I mean, it's Florida, what they're really trying to go after are these groups. Remember, they went after Acorn. They're trying to go after groups that register particularly poor people.
Right.
So by saying to someone that might live 40 miles from the county seat, every time you get a card, you got to bring it in. Okay, and if
these are judges of election.
No,
registrars.
Deputy registrars. Right. These
deputy registrars.
So the point is you don't want someone to hold the cards and have a person sign up to register, and it never gets turned in. Obviously, you need rules, but having that kind of stringent rule where you could be fined for it if you don't turn in 48 hours, now that's rather absurd. But that's why they pulled out, because they couldn't take a chance. Their members can't be driving that many miles like every day. Usually people allow more time for that. But since Florida added the fine, they pulled out.
Well, that's real voter suppression.
Absolutely.
I mean, these ID laws, I mean, I've said all along, this is, talk about voter suppression. Talk about trying to hold down the vote.
Well, I know that a lot of listeners out there say, well, you need a ID to go anywhere. Well, it's true, you have to have an ID to become registered. But if you study the history of this, some of the top people in the Bush White House, okay, who got on the Federal Election Commission and others, we now know things we didn't know several years ago.
Yeah.
How they plotted to do all these things. It's not your average legislator, not even your average Republican. But these folks plot to find a way. But see, you can't pull these games unless it hurts a particular population. Obviously, if blacks voted equally between Republicans and Democrats, they couldn't try these games.
Right.
But since they know that Latinos, blacks, the elderly, and the poor generally vote more Democratic, they target these populations with these schemes. The other big scheme they're trying to do in some of these places is they want to go after the students because they felt the students were too supportive of Obama. So now a lot of places say students also have to have a driver's license. Now, you've got tens of thousands of people that live in Illinois, but they're in schools other places. And by law, students are the only ones with a choice. They can either vote, let's say they're out in Massachusetts, or they can vote at their home.
Right.
Okay. But if you say to a student, your student ID won't do,
right.
And you don't find that out until a few days before the election. And so if you want to vote, you got to go spend whatever cost to go get a Massachusetts driver's license. So anyway, there's schemes like this. Some of those have been struck down. Others, unfortunately, are still on the books. But again, like I say, nobody wants to have fraud. But what the courts have consistently said, including the Justice Department's Texas case, is you've proven no fraud whatsoever. In other words, you bring in these cases, you claim you're making these changes to fight fraud, and yet you can show us no examples of how someone has been impersonating a voter.
Hasn't the Supreme Court, I mean, there's been a ruling about students. The Supreme Court has ruled that they are eligible to vote at the college in the town where their college is located.
That is the law.
They have a choice, either at home or where they're living now.
That is the law, but some states, like I say, if they pass a voter ID law, they also get to decide what is a qualified ID. Now that's where it's gotten very controversial.
I think Wisconsin did that, didn't they? I
Wisconsin was stricter, and of course we all know the most famous case in Indiana when they passed
oh yeah.
theirs, and then all those nuns who've been voting for 50 years were denied the right to vote because they were elderly nuns. They did not have a state Indiana driver's license or a state ID.